Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you for
Fantastic.
asking.
Oh, fantastic. So I was very interested to talk to you because, well, actually, to be honest, you had me when you said that you worked with Disney previously, and I used to work for Disney. So immediately I'm like, I want to talk about it, especially from your perspective, which I think is so interesting in corporate recruiting and HR. And I think this is going to be such a great episode for anybody who's looking to get hired in this current market. And I'm excited to chat about it. So, let's start with your experience with working with Disney.
Actually, I work for three different divisions of Disney. I work for consumer products. I was one of the first recruiters when they started Disney Online,
Oh,
DOL, and then they moved it to Disney Interactive, which was more of the games, and now it's all the online stuff.
cool. I remember, so I worked in sales, like I did the college program
Okay.
and I started in ticket sales. And I remember the onboarding process was literally life changing. I think any of us who were in my program at the time were just like feeling so grateful to work there. And I often think back onto the Disney onboarding process and just how they treat their employees in general and how like excited they get them to be a part of the company. I think it's truly such a unique experience.
It definitely is. You're part of that mouse family, right? And you definitely feel it no matter what layer or level you're in. I mean, I know they called us cast members, even in corporate, but Disney really has a very good program in orientating people through their organization. And a lot of companies recruit from Disney because of the caliber of people that they hire.
I literally teared up during the onboarding process. Like they were telling us just how much responsibility we have, and like I'm literally working like ticket sales. I'm not in corporate. I don't have like a huge sway, but truly like the way that they get you excited to be an employee is something that like I think about as for myself as an aspiring entrepreneur, like as going into thinking about how I want to structure my own corporate situation and like hiring people and thinking back to that experience and remembering just how magical they made the whole thing. Like I still love Disney today. I'm literally going to Disneyland next week. It's crazy.
I saw your social media. I saw you at Disneyland. Now, let me ask you, did you go through Burbank or did you go through Disney at another location?
We were in Anaheim, so we did their onboarding at their Anaheim like employee center. But I spent some time at Burbank later during my professional internship. I was working in the backside house of I was working in the back of house in sales, but I really wanted to be an Imagineer. So that was actually like my dream job before I discovered my love for podcasting. So for anybody listening, yes, that was my original dream job. I wanted to be an Imagineer. That's what I thought I was going to do. But with Disney, it's tricky. And I think this is an interesting segue because corporate in general, especially something like Disney, it's very difficult to move laterally, like to go from one department to the other. Did you experience anything like that?
So I've worked for a couple of entertainment companies and most recently left CNN and have worked for ABC and Warner Brothers. And what I know about entertainment on the corporate side, it's really about alliances. It's
Hmm.
really about aligning yourself with key individuals that can share your experience and encourage others to look at you and interview you. I mean,
Yeah.
internal movement does happen, but there's a way that they go about it. They certainly ask around, like,
Yeah.
what do you think about Mandy? And, have you worked with her on projects? And so you find that happening on the back end
Mhm.
more often than not.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Like when I was working for Disney, I spent a lot of time getting to know a lot of the people above us. Disney did this really cool thing where they had weekly like lectures for the DCP where they would bring in higher ups from different departments of the company to talk to us about their job and their experience and then like afterwards I would always make a point to connect with them and to like schedule a time just to go and have coffee with them or something, because to your point, I think it's super important. Like a really great actionable takeaway is trying to network. Like if you do have an intention to move laterally, like make the effort to spend time with the individuals that you want to be working with in the future, have them get to know you. Do you have any tips about that, about like how to break the ice?
So Disney is a very unique organization because at all levels, I think professionals have an open door policy where
Mm,
they really, if you just wanted to have a 15-minute chat, they're very open to that. They often encourage that. Like one of the things being in corporate HR, it was you have to walk the floors. You have to walk the floors to get to know people. If I see you sitting at your desk more often than not, then I'm wondering what you're really doing, right?
yeah.
Even though there's so much work at Disney. So I think that it's important to get to know people. Definitely be part of those employee initiatives.
Mm,
And anytime they have different programs or volunteer scenarios, those are very good to start networking with people and seeing them at face value. So you don't see like a CFO or a president or a
yeah.
C-level person. You actually just see them for themselves in those types of settings. And that's
That's
a
a good
great
one.
way to open up the door and have conversation. Executives have conversations about employees all the time. And I
Mm,
remember sitting in some of those conversations in my weekly meetings, and I'll be like, hey, did you remember or have you ever interviewed that intern from, parks or whatever? I was really impressed with her background, and maybe they've only met through, a volunteer scenario
mm.
in the organization. So it's a great opportunity to see people face value and not their title.
Yeah, that's such a great one, especially like the volunteer experiences, because a lot of the times higher executives want to be seen at those events and they want to show their support for these,
Right.
like whatever opportunity they're volunteering for. And at Disney, I think a lot of the time too, we were incentivized to go to these kinds of events, and it's such I never thought of it like that, but it's such a good way to meet any of the people like cross functionally in your network or in your departments, or I guess cross functionally like across the company is what I'm trying to
Right.
say.
Right. It's a great opportunity. And networking as a whole, I mean, even today in today's climate, it's very important to network through LinkedIn, to just reach out to people that you've worked with before, maybe former supervisors. You never know who
Totally.
knows who.
Totally. I think networking is something I talk about a lot, especially like entrepreneurs need to be networking all the time, either in their industry and outside of it, I think is also helpful. But I'm glad that you brought up LinkedIn because it's not something that I use a lot, but
Mhm.
I'm curious to get your tips and tricks on how to best use LinkedIn, because I think it's a sort of like underrated. I feel like it's like the dark horse of all the social media where like a lot of good stuff goes on there, but I just don't know how to get into it.
Sure. So just to tag team on the networking, let me give you a really good tip
Yeah.
for anyone in any situation. If you're making a cold call or a blind situation, whether it's in a corporate environment or on LinkedIn, always start off with a compliment.
Mm,
Do a little homework on that person. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you have beautiful eyes. It could be, oh, I see that you have a really progressive background. I'm very interested in learning more,
totally.
right?
Totally. Yeah.
Start off with a compliment. And I tell people that during the interview too. Like, diffuse the situation because interviews are so intimidating.
Yeah.
Start off with a compliment,
Yeah,
right?
that's such a good tip. I think like especially now as a podcaster, I get people messaging me all the time, and it's so weird to be on the other receiving end of this now as opposed to being on the giving end. Like for so long, for pretty much anything, I was always like reaching out to people, and that was something I learned as well. Never start with the ask, start with like what you can do for them or
Right.
a compliment or something, because that really is so different from like the mass flood of things that you're getting on a regular basis, that it does help to get you to stand out just like almost immediately.
Well, we're in a time that people want to know that I know you or I know
Mhm.
something about you. That's why likes, right?
Yeah.
It's very important. And so I think that if you're going to make a cold impression, you need to do it and chill it down a little bit, and that opens up the door. Now,
Yeah.
back to your question about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an amazing professional resource. What I love about LinkedIn is the fact that they validate a lot of the information. So, like fake
Mm.
profiles really don't exist on LinkedIn because they go through and they verify that. I use LinkedIn. I've always used LinkedIn as a recruiter. I use it now to share my career coaching business. It's a great way to um, to identify key players or potential decision makers or people you really want to be associated with, like the 6 degrees of separation, right?
Yeah.
So knowing this person means you might be connected to another person. The important thing about LinkedIn that people don't really know is it really is based upon keywords and algorithms.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so people think, well, I'll just put podcast hosts. Well, then you have to define that. You really have to define that just a little bit further, because if not, you're just going to have a wide reach and not
Mm.
really a targeted reach. LinkedIn is very good for targeted reach.
So this is something that you should be putting like in your bio.
So, right underneath your name, you want to have keywords, and think about
Mm.
it this way. I want people to be able to find me because of what?
Mm.
So rather than giving yourself these creative titles and all of this, that's how people will find you based upon those keywords.
Yeah.
Right under your name, that's a great real estate, but also in the about section, you want to have
Oh.
some viable information, searchable information, because that's what pulls from the algorithm.
Yeah, that's such a great tip because I think it's weird that somebody like my age who technically like grew up with social media is not necessarily the presence on LinkedIn because I think like the interface is different and the
That's
vibe is different. And so for us, it almost feels a little bit like the barriers to entry are somewhat higher. And it's almost like we have to like figure out this new social media and understand how it works. But I feel like once you understand the benefits of LinkedIn, it's like a massive reach and trajectory.
It is a massive reach. So I added headhunter, which is an old term. I added that to my LinkedIn profile, and I was able, literally within probably the last, I want to say 45 days, but I feel like it's within 30 days, I received 2 new clients. They said they
Wow.
were looking for headhunters, and headhunter, my name popped up. One lady is actually in England, and the other lady is in the DC area. So, not even in my area. I'm in
Yeah.
Los Angeles.
That's fantastic. And I think that this is really important because any entrepreneur out there who wants to get acknowledged for their business, they want to get new clients, or they want to just connect with other people in that industry, knowing these small changes to their profile can lead to like big differences. And I think it's something like I'm going to go back and look at because my LinkedIn could definitely use some love.
So, LinkedIn optimization is very, very important. I mean, that's how people find you, through the searching. Also, now they have added this creative element, which I really like, or you can personalize your LinkedIn page with a banner. And
Yes.
I think that that really stands out, but also remember to get endorsements. Like after our
Um,
conversation today, I'll go back and, give you my feedback or whatever. But I
yeah.
think that's important because LinkedIn, as a recruiter, we look at the story. So we who
Mhm.
you are, what those keywords are, what you say you can do, what you've accomplished. But then we want to look down and see who we're connected to that knows you, that could
Mm.
validate that information, or who in different organizations, key people have said some really great things about you. So it really is a different type of web presence that's validated, that has more weight and merit from a corporate perspective.
That makes sense. So, for a recruiting purpose, is LinkedIn sort of like your first filter? And then if you like somebody, then you'll check their resume?
So LinkedIn is always my first filter. So I am a little bit of a different recruiter. I'm very, very proactive. So I don't wait for people to apply into the
Mm,
requisition. I go to LinkedIn, build out some searches based upon keywords and try to find people. So definitely looking at their LinkedIn profile. And then once I receive their resume, then I just sort of match the story. What
yep.
recruiters do is we really match the story. Like, are there gaps? Are there different, do you have a different profile? Is there a different name? Is there,
Mm,
all these different things? And people really forget to make sure that they're very consistent, right?
yes.
So
Totally.
that's one thing that we're
Totally.
looking for as well. And so I think that LinkedIn holds a lot more credibility than
Mm,
just a resume. Because it could say anything on a resume. And what people need to understand is they can do that because a resume is a marketing document. So
oh.
I'll date myself. Maybe at MySpace, we call them customer care, but then at, a call center, we call them customer service. So
Mm,
you can market yourself as long as you're not embellishing, as long
okay.
as they can see the relevancy to the story, right?
Yeah.
But an app, but your a lot of people are talking about ATS resumes. That is sort of legal binding because that goes into the system and you apply as an applicant so that they can verify that information through third parties. So
What's an
then you're an
ATS resume?
applicant.
What's the ATS stand
So
for?
the AT is the applicant tracking system. When you apply online and they say, oh, well, we need your resume into the system. That's the applicant
Okay.
tracking
Okay.
system. That starts you moving into the process through interviews or becoming an applicant.
This is, I think, the hardest thing. These systems, how do you hack the system? Because I feel like when I was looking for jobs before my current position, I feel like I could not get past that stage because I was like, once I get into an interview, I know that I can talk to them and they can understand my story a little bit better and like maybe I can explain myself. But to get to that point was so challenging. And I'm so curious to know what tips you have to get through these systems.
Absolutely love that question. Love that question because for 25 years, I've been the gatekeeper. So I
Totally.
have been the person to say, nope, not qualified. Nope. And so a recruiter's job really is to screen candidates.
Hmm.
We do that, and LinkedIn has stated that it takes 6 to 13 seconds to read a resume.
Wow.
Like,
That's
what
like
kind of
nothing.
impression can you make in 6 to 13 seconds? If there's a cover letter and a 4-page resume, like
Totally.
that's just it, right? So we're really scanning for information that is relevant to the job, industry,
Hmm.
title, succession, education, that sort of thing. So in order to hack the system, which is the applicant tracking system, I actually show people how to go directly to the gatekeeper or directly to the hiring leader. Because
Interesting.
here's the really interesting thing. A recruiter typically has 25 to maybe 50 requisitions on their plate.
Okay.
So if there is 1,000 people in each one of those requisitions, I have to dedicate a certain amount of time to go through them, track if
Right.
I'm interested, phone screens. But if you bypass the recruiter and go to the hiring manager or the leader, they're going to see the value because a hiring leader doesn't want just a butt in the seat. They need a qualified person. They are hiring for a solution,
Right.
right? And so they're looking at the resume a little bit differently, where the applicant tracking system may grade you, rank you based upon the keywords. So if you don't use keywords that are in that job description, then, and like I was saying, customer care, customer service, well,
Right.
maybe customer care takes you out of the ranking
Yeah.
for a customer service job. You see, so
Totally.
so that's why I tell people don't apply through the applicant tracking system. I know there are recruiters that will hate me to say that, but it really, you don't have the best opportunity to
Totally.
get seen through being in a pool with so many people.
Totally. So how do you advise them to get around that? Like what kind of research should they be doing to find these hiring leaders?
Absolutely. So again, LinkedIn, they can go to the company page. They can use some information from the job description to find a leader in that organization. So maybe it's a acquisition, partnerships, and sales. Just put that in the keywords
Oh,
on the company page, and you'll see those people who are within that organization or have that on their profile. Takes a little digging, but you can
yeah.
look and you can identify someone who could potentially be the hiring leader.
Well, that's so helpful because when I was looking, I was always thinking like, oh, HR, recruiter, hiring. But if they have different terminology, you might be looking in the wrong places.
Right, right. And a recruiter could be, so when I was with Disney, I was responsible for all of accounting, finance,
Hmm.
and then any new positions. So my time is really, spread very thin. So maybe I'm not giving all of my attention to that requisition which you've applied to. Maybe, and this is the truth, I hate to admit this, but maybe I've only gone through the first 50 and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give them the best of the first 50. Here's three candidates and move them along
Yeah.
when there's 500 people in there. So there are 400 people 450 people who have never gotten touched, seen. And that
Yep.
to me, that's why I decided to be a career coach, because I really want to help people to understand how to package and position themselves in a better way so that they can navigate to at least get seen. Because most
Totally.
people can articulate their background and share who they are and share their achievements, but it's getting through that door. And that's what I really want to help people do.
That truly was my biggest struggle. I moved back to the US about a year ago after working abroad, and I was looking for a job in tech. I'd never worked in tech before, but my skill set was in project management, so I was confident that I could do anything in tech really. And it was nearly impossible to get a job just through simply like applying online. It literally
Sure.
just didn't work. And how I got my current job was through a referral from a friend. And literally, like, I was so frustrated and disillusioned by the whole process because I couldn't understand where the disconnect was happening. Like, was it me? Was it these companies that I was applying for? Was it the system? It was just totally super frustrating. And like, you think that you're doing everything right. You think, I've made my resume look very different. I have, included all the keywords in the job description, but eventually you just get so like frustrated and you're so over
Right.
it and you just almost stop caring, which doesn't lead to success either.
Right. You touched upon something that's very, very important. And that's one of the reasons also why I've decided to do what I do. I've been laid off twice. I've been unemployed through, long periods of times, and I don't have a degree. So
Yeah.
most jobs require a degree. Most jobs that I have accepted were through referrals, right? Someone's like, oh, she's really good. And so, but you can become disenchanted and desperate
Totally.
during the process. Like, how do you keep yourself up and motivated? And so we are so closely aligned with, we align our well being, our self worth with what we do, how we contribute, whether that's work or whatever. And so, what people fail to realize, and they don't think that they need a career coach because they're like, oh, I'll just find a job. But recruiters can actually hear the desperation in your tone. I'll give
Totally.
you an example. I have a client, a former client, who just has been unemployed for 2 years and decided to go to get his MBA. And he is an IT person. Strong IT, could be management or a director, now with an MBA and about 10 years experience. It's been so long for him to find a job that he now applied for a sales job. And I said, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, it's selling IT. And I said, no, you did not go to an Ivy League school to get an MBA to be,
Yeah.
not to be shady or anything like that, but your experience speaks to something different. But it comes across as very like, I really need to get this job. I've
Yeah.
really been out on the hunt for a long time. So he's not able to really articulate you
Mm.
articulate his experience, but also to engage you to ask more questions about his background because of being disenchanted and not receiving any feedback and the thank you but no thank
Totally.
you letters and all of that. So our mental health, our well-being is part of the job search, and it's really important. So I do offer tools to help people with that while they're engaged in the job search.
I think that's such an excellent point because like you're in an interview and it's kind of like going back to what we were talking about before with the ask, like you you don't want to come off like too strong, you don't want to come off like desperate. People can smell that a mile away and it's immediately off-putting.
Right,
And if you're like in a low place and you're stressed out, people are going to want to hire you because it's still like person to person. We can pick up
right,
on that stuff and it makes people uncomfortable. And I think it's so interesting that it's almost about like, I know that this happened to me also, but through that journey of being unemployed, it was such a self exploration experience because you're looking at all these jobs, you're like, okay, like, am I into this? Can I do this job? Does it sound interesting to me? And if you're like, no, it doesn't, and then you kind of have to like keep asking these questions like why? And then at the same time, you're having to position yourself as the best you've ever been. And so you're asked to like exude confidence and exude personality and like you have to say like, yeah, I can totally do this job when you're in such a weird place when you're like
right.
I don't have a job. Either I was laid off or I like our life is changing around you and there's so much emotion happening and to not acknowledge that portion of this process I think is such a detriment and it can lead to you like missing out on a great opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So mindset is so important. And whether you're extremely comfortable, confident, cocky, or you just need to get money in the door for your family because it impacts your life and your
Yeah.
livelihood in so many different ways. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, when you're not getting any feedback, when you're sending out hundreds and hundreds of applications and resumes, and they're crickets, no one is calling you for an interview, or the worst case scenario is you get an interview and they say you were great and they were really just being nice and they never call you again.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very important to acknowledge the human aspect. And so AI is really big right now, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's AI.
Totally.
And I preach to people that it's a human being that's actually going to hire you. So you want to get in front of another human being. You don't, sure, you can use AI to update your resume and to, highlight great experience that's relevant, and you can use it for interviewing tools. But unless you can communicate what's on your resume, it was
Yeah.
a waste of your time.
And you're also working with people every day. You know,
Right.
you are like talking and communicating with people in meetings, you're emailing back and forth. So, like, you have to be a good fit for the company. And I think this is what's so special about recruiters is like my best friend is a recruiter for Amazon
Oh, okay.
and she always talks about how like she works for the employees. She doesn't work for Amazon because she really wants to make sure that they are a good fit for the role
Exactly.
and vice versa. And I think it's important for people to remember when they're looking at a role to be like, is this something that I really want? And is this something that I'm going to be excited to do every day?
Right. Right. And that's very different. So recruiters, I'll just say that, we rarely get any accolades. We rarely get the pat on the back to say, great, but we do look at the overall aspect of the company and how we're adding value because hiring key
Totally.
talent is very essential to any company's growth. I mean, no organizational leader wants to be known as the person who keeps cutting their staff
Yeah.
to reorganize. I mean, that just doesn't look good. So it's very important. So, pat your friend on the back and let them know that they're doing a really great job because it really is a thoughtless, sort of selfless, um, And only recruiters understand that. Like we
Yeah.
only recruiters can talk to other recruiters and say, "Hey, God, I'm really having a hard day," because
Yeah.
we are very invested in making sure that the company is growing and achieving its goals.
Yeah. And I think what you said rings true for companies at any level. Like if you're an entrepreneur right now and you're like in a very early stage startup, for example, and you're looking to expand your team, even just one person, you're now a recruiter. And you now have to look at this and think strategically and understand if this person can really add value to your company. Because to your point, if you're a CEO and you're hiring a bunch of people who are not good fits, it does not reflect well on you. So maybe let's switch the focus and talk about hiring from a managerial perspective as opposed to being the hiree.
Okay. So that's a good point. Hiring from a manager perspective is so if you want to add to your team, you then become the recruiter and the
Yes.
hiring leader, right?
Yes.
And so you're looking for soft skills, but you're also looking for technical skills, not based on technology. It could be based on technology, but what is needed to perform your day to day function. So you're really kind of thinking left brain, right?
Yeah.
You just cannot think middle of the road. And so you also have to be able to discern what is real and what is sort of, yeah, they're just pulling my leg here, right?
Mm,
And so that's why you need that human aspect. And I think that any strong leader really wants someone to be they see people as a succession, right? I just don't want someone to be the sales associate for 35 years. I want this person to grow because if they grow, I grow.
mm,
If I help them move, whether it's within my department or within the company as a whole, it's a reflection on me.
yeah, totally. How do you how do you learn to read people? Because I think when you're sitting in an interview and you're interviewing somebody, you really have to make some like quick judgments very quickly. And a lot of that time you're picking up on what's being said, but what's also not being said and how they're sitting and how they're interacting with you. Do you have any tips for how people can get better? Because I think this is a great and applicable point for people like in general, like this is something I want to get better at.
So you're an excellent communicator first.
Thank you.
No worries there. I think so let's take it from the applicant standpoint. From the applicant standpoint, if I were your coach, I would tell you to do some mindset things
Mm,
before your interview. One of the things that I like to tell people to do, and I really have in sort of an unorthodox method, I really find what works for you. So maybe you like to listen to music. And I'd say, I would immerse myself in those songs before I get ready to
mm,
interview, right? Something that's really going to be very feel good, that's going to take me to, that can shift my energy. So
mm.
at least I can make it through 30 minutes or 60
Yes.
minutes of an interview. So that's what I would tell you. There's also some affirmations, maybe some exercise, maybe just going, like I'm very spiritual. So maybe going outside and grounding yourself with your
Mm,
bare feet, right?
yes.
On the grass. So do that just so that you can get through.
Yeah.
From the interview standpoint, if you're a nervous person, what I tell them to do is I tell them to ask more questions than having them being asked the questions. Because if I
Yeah.
ask you a lot of questions, I can sit back and listen to your responses. And then I don't have to worry about how I'm putting all this together, which actually comes across as very, like, wow, this person is innovative. This person is taking
Totally.
the initiative. This person wants to know more.
They're
So
very
it really,
engaged.
right, very engaged. So from a hiring leader, what you're looking for is you're looking for contact, you're looking for confidence,
Mm,
and you're looking for clear, concise messages or explanations of what
mm,
they do, right? And so
right.
you're looking because no one else should be able to tell your story better than you can.
100%.
So when you're like, well, well, it was back in the day,
Hmm.
no one should be able to tell your story. And so you should really think about an interview as not intimidating. um, I like to say that interviewing and getting hired is kind of like dating.
Yeah.
So I kind of diffuse the situation. My resume is like, we're in line at Starbucks and you thought I was attractive and I gave you my number. And then we call each other and we schedule another 15 minutes to go to Starbucks. So the interview is me sitting down, sharing a little bit, you
Mm.
sharing a little bit, and whatever. However, if I take over the conversation and I tell you everything that happened in my life, you might excuse yourself and say, I'm going to go to the bathroom and walk out and never come back, right? 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 So think
Yeah.
about it like dating. Everyone has had a good date and everyone has had a bad date. And so when we simplify that, it helps to lessen the intimidation and we're able to speak a little bit more freely. But
100%.
hiring leaders are looking for clear, concise information and you being able to articulate what's on paper. Because what you have to understand is they already think you're qualified based upon your resume or else they would not waste the time to interview you. Now you just have to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yeah. What do you think about social media? Like, do you think, do a lot of companies, because this is something my mom used to say to me all the time. She was like, oh, be very careful about what you post online. And like, she's always been like, oh, Maddie, I think you should delete this picture before you get hired because like it doesn't, tell your story very well. What are your thoughts about this?
Great question. So I was a contractor with CNN for a year. I knew that I would not get hired there
Mm,
because of my social media. Not that I am really political or overly this or that. I have opinions.
mm,
And you're not allowed to have opinions when you work for some media organizations. There are third parties that now check your social media because they want to make sure that, they're still, socially engaged and there's not a bad reflection on them. So what your mother said was right.
she
While
loved
you're
to hear
looking, yes, tell her yes. So while you're looking for a job, I would just keep my social media private.
Okay, that's super helpful to know. Are there any like red flags that you have about people during the early stages of getting hired?
So I do remember once, I cannot remember where this was. I know, oh, it probably was with Disney. Sorry about that. Where we were checking someone's background and there were some pictures that came up that were, I mean, it was a college party, whatever it was.
Ooh.
And I remember from an HR standpoint, we had to talk the hiring leader and do some triage work with the hiring leader because they automatically like, oh, so the person was in line going through their background and they then opened up their social media and invited the hiring manager to be their contact in social media. But yet they had some pictures that were kind of like, okay. Um, from an HR standpoint, we had to talk that hiring manager to say that that's really subjective, that that's
Mm.
something that you know, we can't bring that up because the person's not an employee. But I will tell you that that person did not last long because it set the tone for the relationship.
Oh,
It set the tone for that subjectivity, for that, red flag concern. And so I just say it's easier to just keep my social media private
yeah.
and make sure, go back and cross reference on LinkedIn and make sure you're not connected to someone else that they know, like on Instagram, Twitter, and that sort of thing. But not on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is okay. But I think that most people still keep LinkedIn pretty professional.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like if you have weird photos from back in the day on Facebook or Instagram or something, it's like when you are about to go meet like a guy for a date and you scroll down and he has like all these skeezy pictures, you're like, "Ooh," like already it is a bad taste in your mouth. And like,
Right.
even if the date is fantastic, you're
Right.
still like thinking in the back of your head, like, oh, okay, so is this just who he wanted me to think he was, or is this who he actually is?
Right.
And it does really impact the company culture. And it's so funny because the job that I currently have now, I didn't expect this at all and I didn't anticipate it, but it turns out that everyone in our company, we're very small, is very like health conscious. We don't really drink very often. And it's so strange because I wasn't actually like intentionally looking for that type of environment, but it's the kind of person that I am. And to then be it placed into this kind of environment like makes perfect sense. But I think that in this case, it's a great example of when you do hire the right kind of person because this is your company culture. And it wasn't like we chatted about that in the interview. It just happened to work out that way because like our whole interview process went, I guess how it should have.
Mm, right. So nowadays, we're all about building tribes and communities.
Mm,
And so I want to know that the person in my community, on my block, lives a similar life than I do.
mm,
That we're not going to run into any issues, that we're not going to have any conflicts, that I am not going to violate your privacy and you're not going to violate mine. One of the things that I tell people in my coaching is the word subjectivity should be printed on your forehead and in the forefront of your mind because everything is based upon subjectivity. I know people like to say, well, discrimination or the company shouldn't do this or, it's based upon subjectivity. I have had to coach hiring leaders that may have had a bad intern from a particular college and they're like, no, I don't want to hire anyone from that college ever again.
mm.
Well, why? Well, then what was the opportunity for you as a leader? But subjectivity is what we live with. It is our
Totally.
opinion. It is what we think. It is what we're taught. It's based upon our environment. It is all in social media. And so I like to help people, even in the interview research, really remove that subjectivity from the process.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing this up because not enough people really recognize and understand that our human nature, it's not prejudice or anything like that. It is simply how we are designed as humans that when we meet somebody, we are already making snap judgments within the first
Right,
couple of seconds before anybody's even said anything. So, like, appearance matters, what you're
right,
posting on social media matters, the first couple of seconds of an interaction really, really matter. And like first impressions do matter. And you have
right,
to take that into consideration, especially if you're looking to get a job, if you are trying to, even if you're trying to find like a partner for your company, you have to think about how you're coming across to other people because you're right. It's not discrimination. It's simply the fact that like it's just how we're wired and you
right.
have to acknowledge that and accept it. And then to your point, as a hiring manager, you remove some of those like initial biases throughout the process. But again, I mean, if you are looking at a candidate and their social media is a hot mess, their LinkedIn hasn't been updated in 5 years, and their resume looks different than their LinkedIn, like all of these things are just the exact same as if I were to meet you at Starbucks. Like we're both gonna like see what each other's wearing and be like,
Right.
oh, Maddie is a girly girl. She wears bows in her hair, etc. And like those are just the kind of things that happen like online and in person.
Sure. So we are wired as human beings from an ego perspective, right?
Yes.
And so our ego is designed 100% to protect us. Now, how that ego is wired is based upon our childhood, our
Mm,
environment, our teachings, our faith, whatever it might be. And so that's when the subjectivity plays in. So you could be interviewing with someone and you have no idea what that subjectivity is. And
mm.
so that's why one of the things that I tell people, put a period in the middle of a sentence and let them ask more.
Ooh, I like
Put a
this.
period in the middle of the sentence and let them ask more. Think about it at the date, right?
Yeah,
If I don't go into all of my life history and all of my partners and whatever, and I just say, life's been amazing, tell me more.
totally.
Tell me more.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, especially yeah, 100%. I think that's such a great the lost art of like absence and letting people come to you and letting people ask more, like that is such a lost art. And to me, now being on the other side of people like pitching me constantly to be on the podcast, like I'm starting to recognize this more. Like if somebody were to follow me on social media, like a couple of my things, ask, maybe like respond to a story, all of which, mind you, take like 5 minutes, and then like DM me on Instagram or send me a message or an email, I'm gonna be like, oh, like I've seen you on
Right.
my social media. You liked my stuff, you commented, you left me a message. Like I've seen you, I now recognize you. And then for you to have sent me an email, like it's an automatic yes. And in that email, if you're like, hey, I would love to set up a time to chat. I'm really interested in your podcast. I think you're doing great work. I'd love to learn more about you. I think that like that is such a great opportunity for me to be like, oh, now I kind of want to know more about you because you've piqued my interest.
Right. And we want to know people are real and not sitting behind, a call center scamming and,
Totally.
trying to, have a conversation. One of the things that happened recently is I received a text message and it was like, hey, are we still on for lunch tomorrow? Number I didn't recognize. And I thought, you must have the wrong number. I didn't recognize. And they're
Yeah.
like, no, 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 we're scheduled lunch. They wouldn't, um, indicate who they were or where we were, scheduled or anything. And I said, I think you have the wrong number. Now I know that they were looking for me to give information so that they can continue. And so I played along for a little while and they're like, oh, well, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. You seem like a nice person. How can I seem like a nice person when I'm saying you have the wrong number? You know nothing about me, right? And
Mm,
so there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of, and so that either weighs into our trust and our building
totally.
those protective mechanisms, or that weighs into our vulnerability and how much we're going to share. And that's just a small example, but we're always being watched, attacked, looked at in some
Hmm.
sort of way. And that
Yeah.
happens in organizations and corporations as well. You get in, and I've seen people that are way too friendly and like
Mm,
Christmas. I love Christmas holiday parties, and it's like, wow, I didn't know that she was that friendly,
yeah.
or wow, I didn't know that, and, I don't know the division of Disney that you were with, but when I was with Disney Online, we had beer parties every Friday. Can you imagine? We had beer parties on Friday in North Hollywood. From an
No.
HR perspective, I was like, cringe, cringe, but it was such at the .com stage where,
Mhm.
hey, we've got a billiard
Oh my
table and
God, it's like Disney trying to be a
yeah,
tech startup.
right, right. And we've got this and we've, laying on the sofa and doing yoga and whatever.
Stop.
Yes. If you could have
What?
seen that office, it was just like, are people working here? But beer parties. And I mean, yeah, we hired a minor, we hired a prodigy who was 15 years old to come and do, yes, I remember this, to come in and do some design coding work. And HR was like an uproar because, first of all, he's 15, he didn't have a driver's license. We had to hire a limo to bring him back and forth to work.
I
This was
love
back in the day.com. They're spending money like crazy. And
I
we're
love
like,
this.
so what happens if he goes to the beer party that starts at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? What,
What
like,
are the implications here?
yeah, yeah. So,
That's amazing. I love that story so much. I think it's so funny. Like, I work in tech now, and it's my first experience, and I came from like corporations, like big corporate companies, and it's just such a different environment. Like, I there's just so many things I don't assume, like coming from corporate. For example, free drinks and snacks to an extreme degree. Like my first day of work, I brought my own coffee creamer to the office because I knew like this is what I like to drink. I'm going to bring it for myself. I didn't assume that it was provided, and I was literally talking to somebody from my office the other day, and they were like, "Oh, how come we don't have any more drinks for the week?" And I was like, "Oh, well, we have a budget that we have to stay within, so we have to wait until Monday when we place the order for the week. So like we just have to make it last." And they were like, "Oh, I thought everything was unlimited." And I was like, no, we
Right.
have a budget that we have to stay within, and I think it's just such a different way of life. And because so many of these kids are recruited like right out of college, they never really get to experience anything else. And like the kids who used to work for Google, they had dry cleaning, haircuts, like you could get your gym membership there, free meals, 3 meals a day, and then they go into the real world after stop working for Google, and it's like they have no idea how life actually works.
Right. And Google had showers and bathrooms and
Yes,
lockers and pods, so they never had to leave.
that
Really.
it's
Right.
truly so crazy. And like it's such a different lifestyle than working corporate, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so like having been in the best of both worlds now, I love my job and I love my company, but I'm also like aware that things are different outside of the tech bubble.
Yeah. Yeah. Very different. I mean, it definitely is back in the old, .com days, my age, but, where, I mean, we had cappuccino machines at every, corner you could turn around, and bagels every day and breakfast. And we had a
Yes,
chef that would come in. And if you worked past 5 o'clock, there was dinner there. And so very different environment than now.
definitely. But you have given us so many amazing tips and tricks and so many actionable takeaways. So, Zena, I super appreciate you coming onto the podcast. This has been quite the illuminating discussion, and I loved spilling the tea. So, like, this has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It's been great.